neoconservative. He's his own separate thing here. He's the Secretary of Defense. But all of his guys, all of his most important guys are neoconservatives. So the Deputy Secretary of Defense is Paul Wolfowitz. The Deputy Secretary of Defense for Intelligence is Stephen Cambone. The Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy is Douglas Feith. And then under him is Abram Shulsky and Bill Ludi and all of these guys, Michael Rubin and others, who are all working on this project to get us into Iraq. And this is the neoconservative network of power. You got Scooter Libby and David Wormser would travel around from state to defense to the vice president's office, but you got Scooter Libby and John Hanna in the vice president's office. You got Zalmay Khalilzad and Elliot Abrams on the National Security Council, Robert Joseph and Stephen Hadley and Eric Edelman. All of these guys were already the network of guys who agreed with this policy going back through the 1990s. It was what they had founded the Project for a New American Century on. And so what they're saying is we should not tolerate any, and remember the time, this was the stated doctrine, we will not tolerate the existence of any Middle Eastern regime that supports terrorism. And supports terrorism can mean anything, right? Like Abu Nidal died in Iraq before the war even started and was a washed up old terrorist from a previous day, but like that's good enough. Got Mujahideen cult commie terrorists who've worked for us ever since, but at that time was a good enough excuse to invade Iraq. They would invoke that. And so they made up that doctrine.
The Mujahideen were in Iraq as well as Afghanistan?
Well, this is a particular sect of Mujahideen kooks who are Iranian communist cultists who had left Iran and gone to work for Saddam Hussein, and then he supported them. They had nothing to do with anti-American terrorism at that time, except, I guess, committing it when they had worked for Iran previously during the Iranian Revolution. But by the time we invaded Iraq, Donald Rumsfeld inherited them, and they've worked for America and Israel ever since then. They have a base in Albania now. But in other words, though, this wasn't Al-Qaeda. This was not any real excuse. They would just invoke the doctrine of fighting terrorism in order to check off this list of all of these governments that they didn't like. And coincidentally and incidentally, and very importantly, of course, this was really, in many cases, Israel's list of enemies, where if it was, say, Colin Powell, which is what people thought they were voting for in the year 2000, by the way. Well, I don't know about this W. Bush, but at least Colin Powell will be up there. We can trust him. They all said, if it had been up to him, we would have done a two-state solution in Palestine and solved that issue. And then we would have had probably the most limited of wars against Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and that would have been it. The rest of it would have been police and/or special forces action. There would have been no invasion of Iraq, which he did lie us into that war, and he's responsible for that. But that was not his policy. That was the policy that came out of the vice president's office and this neoconservative set. And it's really, as Dave Smith correctly says, it's all based on the clean break doctrine, which David Wormser and Richard Pearl, I neglected to mention Richard Pearl and his friends on the Defense Policy Board, but Pearl and David Wormser had written up this policy paper called A Clean Break in 1996, and they wrote it for Netanyahu when he was first prime minister the first time back then. And what it said was, instead of going along with the Oslo peace process and making a deal with the Palestinians, we should just forget all that and we'll have peace through a position of strength and total dominance over our neighbors. And so, but the problem, of course, is and of course, meaning continue to devour Palestine, what's left, the 22% of what's left of historic Palestine in the West Bank and Gaza. But the problem is we have Hezbollah on our northern border, and Hezbollah is backed by Iran by way of Syria. So if you just picture the Middle East, if you want, you could throw up a map and just kind of show there's this arc of power from Tehran in Iran through Syria and to Hezbollah, this Shiite militia in southern Lebanon. Now, Saddam Hussein was the Sunni roadblock in that arc of power. But these guys are stupid, the neoconservatives. They're as stupid as they are arrogant and certain in their policy. And they believed in this harebrained scheme, essentially, that the Jordanians and the Turks would be dominant in the new Saddam Hussein-less Iraq. And that even though it's a supermajority Shiite Arab country, those Shiites, they just love being told what to do by either their original plan was the Hashemite king, the cousin of the king of Jordan, and then they threw that out, and it was the guy who sold them this line that this was possible in the first place, an Iraqi exile, you might remember from that time, Ahmed Chalabi, the head of the Iraqi National Congress. They said, well, we'll just make him the guy instead, which ended up not happening. But that was their plan. And they said the new Shiite-dominated Iraq will then, the religious leaders in Iraq will then force Hezbollah to stop being friends with Iran and start being friends with Israel instead. And they'll even build an oil pipeline to Haifa, or reopen the old British oil pipeline to Haifa, Israel. And they were sold this bill of goods, and they really believed it. And so, and you can find this on my website, scotthorton.org. I have a clean break, a new strategy for securing the realm. And then the companion piece is called Coping with Crumbling States, a balance of power strategy for the Levant. They're both by David Wormser, signed off on by Richard Pearl. And then they wrote a book where Wormser wrote the book and Richard Pearl wrote the foreword. It's called Tyranny's Ally, America's Failure to Remove Saddam Hussein. Get that? America's the ally of Saddam just because we won't launch a war to regime change him. There, right in the title. And then based on the same harebrained scheme. And what's funny about this is this guy, David Wormser, now tries to defend himself. And he did an interview on a podcast not too long ago with this born-again Christian about September 11th and stuff. But he talked about this, and he's like, yeah, no, that's still right. They'll do whatever the Hashemites tell them to do, those Shiites. They just worship and revere anyone who claims to have the blood of the prophet. But if that was true, as Dave Smith pointed out, well, then how come you can't just call the king of Jordan right now and ask him to ask the Ayatollah to knock it off? Call him and have him ask Hezbollah to stop being friends with Iran. Why couldn't they have just done that this whole time? Why do you have to have a regime change in Baghdad before you can make this magic wish come true? And the whole thing is completely stupid. And the Shiites do revere some of the lineage of the family of the Prophet Muhammad, but one, it's not a magic spell of hypnosis and total control over them. And two, that has nothing to do with the Hashemites, who are Sunnis in a whole separate line and are the British sock puppet kings of Jordan, who used to rule Iraq back 70 years ago or something, but have no purchase there whatsoever. And of course, what happened, just real quick, what happened then in the war was they just empowered Iran. They didn't empower Jordan and Turkey and America and Israel over the Iraqis. They just gave Iran even more power than they ever had before. When it was all meant to screw them over, it blew up in the Americans' face.
This episode is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. It's good to be passionate about something. Exploring what interests you adds more color to your life. It makes it more fulfilling in a way. And that's not just limited to your personal life. If you run a business, you know how much of a difference it can make when the people on your team are excited about what they're doing. And if you don't, well, it's time to find out with ZipRecruiter. Try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/Rogan. It's been rated the #1 hiring site based on G2, and that's because ZipRecruiter is always looking for ways to improve the hiring process, including its newest feature that lets you see the most qualified and, more importantly, most interested people for your role to make sure they're some of the first you start talking to. Find candidates who really want your job on ZipRecruiter. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. Try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/Rogan. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Rogan. Meet your match at ZipRecruiter. Do you think that is because of total incompetence and stupidity, or do you think that it was a scam and that they kind of knew this was going to happen in the first place, but what they really wanted to do was sell a lot of weapons, sell a lot of war, make a ton of money? I mean, the amount of money that was generated, how much money did we spend on the Iraq War?
Oh, I mean, on Iraq alone, at least 5 or 7 trillion. I think it was probably 10 trillion for the whole terror war.
Let's stop and think about that.
Yeah.
5 or 10 trillion. Let's just say 5. Let's be nice.
Yeah.
Where's that money going? How many defense contractors were deeply enriched by that? How many defense contractors are involved in, lobbyists, policy, influencing change, influencing certain actions? And why would they do that? Why would they do that? Why would they push a harebrained scheme? Is it because of stupidity, or is it because they don't give a fuck what the excuse is?
Both.
Let's get the party started.
I think...
Let's get some missiles. Let's get some new planes.
Yeah. Okay, so...
Boom, boom.
But, okay, so we can see right in front of us right here where Netanyahu convinced Trump this would be easy, and then it wasn't. And I think that's the same thing here. Iraq was supposed to be easy, and it was easy after all, right? You send the Marines to take Baghdad. They could take it. The 3rd Infantry Division and the Marines were done regime changing the place in, 5 weeks? But then it was a matter of occupying the place and the whole thing devolving into civil war and all that. And I think, well, I'll put it to you like this. In the clean break, it might be in coping with crumbling states, but it might even, I think it's in coping with crumbling states, which is the same thing.
Are we back?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. We had that stupid glitch again.
Yeah, this is my...
Did we get a new computer?
I've done everything. Even, I've talked to the company. They don't know what's going on.
Motherfuckers.
Crazy. Firmware.
Anyway.
I'm sorry. Let me...
Can I ask you this?
Yeah, sure.
So
on the stupidity or the plan. I think, look, plan A is, it'll be fine. And then plan B is, well, at least we can make some money and push this thing on and let both sides fight and weaken each other and these kinds of attitudes for sure.
But that's the point. Like, did they genuinely think that this plan would work, or was this plan just a feasible excuse to talk them into getting the party started?
I have one good argument in your favor there for sure, which would be Senator Joe Biden at the time insisted that we break Iraq into three.
Our greatest president?
Right there with the worst. That we draw these lines and essentially enforce ethnic cleansing or sectarian cleansing and create three sort of mini states within Iraq. And, Antony Blinken was his right-hand man then. And, I mean, that's who these guys are, is, very, very much Israel first, Israel instead types. Mm-hmm. There is something before the clean break called the Oded Yanon plan from, I believe, 1981, which is a real riot to read. It's this Israeli strategist. And the premise of the thing is that the Soviet Union is certain to conquer the entire planet. Talk about one world government. We're about to have one world communism run out of Moscow. And poor little Israel's going to be all alone out here. So we have no choice but to smash every near Arab state into as many warring tribal pieces as we possibly can to weaken all of them relative to us as this desperate strategy. And of course, the Soviet Union didn't exist anymore at all by the end of the decade. But that was the premise for the thing. And here's what I was going to say before the glitch was... There is a statement I think it's in Coping with Crumbling States, where he kind of says, these states are pretty artificial, and without, the Ba'athist construct in Iraq and Syria, you would have these smaller tribal-based type units. So then, in other words, if you can't have a completely compliant sock puppet there, might as well make them fight and destroy their countries. And that certainly happened in the case of Iraq, certainly happened in the case of Syria under Obama as well, where they just said, look, if we can't get the Al-Qaeda guys to sack Damascus and get rid of Assad, at least we can just destroy the place.
Do you think there's a parallel in when we first went into Iraq, like Desert Storm? It was very easy, right? Relatively. Mm-hmm. Minimum loss of American lives. And I think everybody got a little cocky.
Oh, yeah. That absolutely was part of that. Just like what we just saw with Venezuela.
That's what I was
It was so easy.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
I mean, people asked me right after Venezuela, so what do you think this means for Iran? And I was like, bad news, right? Like, nobody thinks we're going to go in there and kidnap the Ayatollah. But if you can put eyeballs on him, you can put a bomb on his head.
Well, they killed him.
Yeah, and that's all you got to do.
And that didn't even help.
Of course not.
It's like, is it true that whenever they've been negotiating with someone, Israel kills them?
I think that happened at least a couple of times early in the war, yeah. I mean, that was what they said. In fact, I forget if it was Vance or Trump who said, well, we can't say, I think it was Trump said, we can't say who we're negotiating with because they'll get killed. And like, you're supposed to think that hardliners in Iran will kill them for trying to negotiate. But no, this is the Israelis will kill them,
That is wild.
Yeah.
That's wild. It's wild that it's true. One of the things that's not talked about at all since Iran, rarely talked about, is Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's so strange how that kind of just left people's consciousness. It's like they now just concentrating entirely on this Iran thing. Mm-hmm. And the Ukraine thing is fascinating too, because it was one of the few wars that I saw leftist support. It was very interesting. It was like, kind of right after they put the masks and the syringes down from their profiles, then it was Ukraine flags.
Right. Metzger had a joke about that.
Did he?
Like, he starts out like, hey, invading Ukraine is bad. Can't we all agree on that? Like, he really gives them, he leans on, can't we all agree that it's bad? And he's like, but it wasn't cure for COVID. You got to admit, and it was. They just switched from night to day on that. And then, the other thing, and look, a big part of that is Putin is a great stand-in for Trump. If you're an angry liberal something, you got to be angry at something. And he represents, now we're the common turn, and the Russians are the more conservative Christian force. And so, not that Trump's a Christian, but you know what I mean, and they're anti-right everything, that the Russians are the right.